Conventional oil or synthetic? Which one's better, Don?
Well, each one has its place, Lake. There's certain things that you can do with petroleum oil, like breaking an engine in, for example, which you wouldn't want to do with the synthetic oil, especially depending on what type the engine is. For example, this one right behind us here is flat tappet motor.
You know, that old saying goes, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So we got dealt some lemons. We're gonna give you some lemonade, hopefully. This engine actually has some really unique piston rings in them.
It does. You need to explain that just a little bit.
The coatings on these piston rings are truly unique, cutting edge. We're still doing the R&D on them.
This is something that has not been done before, by the way.
Yeah, these are a variable hardness coating. The actual coating is one layer, but as it wears away, the hardness changes.
That's correct. And the reason for that is that when you are breaking your ring in, it's very critical. The first 30 minutes or so is very critical in ring break-in.
Like a camshaft.
Exactly. When you have a ring, and we're talking about the top ring here, when you have a ring that's got a coating on the outside of it that's fairly soft, it conforms to the cylinder wall really nicely.
Yeah.
The problem with that soft coating is you can't run it 100,000 miles.
It wears out.
It wears out too fast. But with this particular ring, as that coating wears in to the cylinder wall, it gets harder.
Yeah, it's almost like the perfect blend of having, say, a chrome ring or a moly ring.
Exactly.
There is no chrome moly ring, by the way. It's like that chrome ring hardness that lasts forever,
right,
but was always a bear to break in.
Yep.
This now gives us the ability to have that quick break-in like moly, but that long life like chrome, all in one ring. And you're like, so what does that have to do with conventional oil or synthetic? Well, we've already broken in the rings.
Yep, the rings are broken.
The boring part is we got to put time on it. We got to run it to get some time. And we're like, just running it's boring.
Yeah, we can't do boring here. We gotta always test something.
Right.
So we're actually going to test the wear characteristics of this ring with two different oils.
Right.
2 or 3 different oils. We'll get 2 different oils, whatever.
At least 2.
Yeah, at least 2 different oils.
There might be a surprise later.
We could fit another one in.
So the first one's going to be a and we're going to put that up against a but just for fun, I decided, why don't we run a name brand conventional oil versus the discount brand synthetic? We went to Walmart and
got some oil.
Yep.
So we got oil that anybody else out there can get.
Right, and these are pretty cheap oils, by the way. Yep. Probably some of the cheapest oils we've ever put in this engine. We have a test procedure we've been doing for years with this engine to test oils. So as long as we follow that same test procedure, we can compare not only how these 2 oils compare to each other, we can compare them to how all the other oils we've run in this engine have worked before.
Exactly. And one of the nice things about this particular test, this special coating that you have on these rings has a material in there that can be measured that is not anywhere else in the motor.
Yeah, it's nowhere else in the motor, and it's not in the oil.
And it's not in the oil. And when we do the oil analysis after we put all this time on it, and we can see that metal that's in the oil, we know it's coming from the ring.
Right.
So we will be able to tell, is there more of it with the conventional oil, or is there more of it with the synthetic oil?
Right. So that's the 2 birds with 1 stone. So we had to do a test. We got to learn about the piston ring coating. Yep. You get to learn about the difference between different motor oils, and we're going to show you the results in this video.
All at the same time.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started.
Let's do it.
So one of the key things when you're doing an oil test is you have to do what's called a double flush. So we've already run this engine with break-in oil to not only break it in, but to clean the engine out. We're going to put in the first fill of Havoline. We're just going to run it for a few minutes and then drain it out and then put in a fresh fill of Havoline because we have to do a double flush. If you're not doing a double flush, you're really not doing an oil test properly. That part going. Yeah, here we go. And yes, we're going to pre-fill the oil filter. We'll leave a link in the description box below for the video on that because There's a good reason for doing this. Okay, so we've run the engine up to temperature. Now it's time to drain out the first fill, which we're going to use to flush the engine out. Then we'll refill it, take our 0-hour sample, and get started with the test. There's our 0-hour sample of the Havoline. Time to start it back up. Just like that. Time to take the sample. So why did I choose Havoline? Well, it wasn't random, and it wasn't a mistake. I chose Havoline because Chevron makes Havoline, and Chevron is one of those vertically integrated companies. Not only do they make base oil, they also own Chevron Ornite that makes additives. So by choosing Havoline, we're choosing a product from a company that is vertically integrated that makes both base oil and additives. Kind of like the old Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Time to make the donuts. Time to take the sample and try not to burn myself.
Careful, it's only about 270 degrees.
It's a bit warm. Woo, she's black.
Fuel contamination.
All right, Chevron Havoline oil test done, drained out. Time to put in the Walmart SuperTech flush. Since our SuperTech jug is empty, I peeked inside. I don't see anything. Of course, the camera can't show you looking down inside the jug as good as I can. Well, maybe you can actually. You can kind of see that's my hand back there. Pretty clean inside that jug. Just for fun, let's cut it open. And this is what the bottom of an oil jug should look like. It should be clean, free of residue, even after a little bit of storage. Now, this stuff is probably pretty much brand new, but the idea is, if you got junk in the bottom of your jug, that's not good. I'll leave a link in the description box below for our video about old oil. Okay, SuperTech's in the engine, 0-hour sample taken. Let's get it started up. Time for a dyno run on the Walmart SuperTech. All right, we're at the end of 2 hours with the Walmart SuperTech. It is time to make a run right now. So why did I choose SuperTech? Because Walmart doesn't make oil. This is made by a private label blender, someone that does not have any engine testing. They're purely relying on an additive company to give them a formula that they just make that will meet the spec that Walmart asked for. That's as simple as it is, which is why I chose it to see how it would perform against that name brand conventional oil. Okay, both oils have been tested, all the samples taken. We'll send them off to the lab and show you the results right now. Okay, these results are mind-blowing, incredible. I'm gonna do the best I can to try to stay on track. Really, we're gonna break it down into 3 key areas for these results, and each of them is gonna tell a pretty important story that I hope you can kind of see in the overall arc of all the videos we've been doing. We're teaching, right? I'm not just trying to give you a fish, tell you what oil to use. I'm trying to teach you how to fish so you can choose your own oil that's best for your application and make good decisions going forward. And I think this video could be really helpful in learning how to land that big fish. So let's jump into the details right now. First things first, let's go to the dyno results. And the first thing we did was we started off with our baseline oil, which is a 10W40 braking oil. So that's high zinc, no friction modifiers. And you can tell as soon as we go from 10W40, no friction modifiers, high zinc, and just go down to a 10W30 and then add in friction modifiers, there's a massive difference in horsepower. So there's a 10 horsepower difference just changing the viscosity from a 10W40 to a 10W30 and then changing the additive package and adding in friction modifiers and reducing the amount of zinc. Remember from our previous video about friction and wear and how they're independent phenomenon. ZDP, zinc, reduces wear, it increases friction. And you can see that from these results clearly about the friction impact here. Much higher level of zinc, much higher level of friction. So lower viscosity, adding friction modifiers, it's worth 10 horsepower. Now you get an idea of why are OEMs going to lower and lower viscosity oils with more and more friction modifiers? It's because it makes better fuel economy. On the dyno, that's horsepower. In your car, it's fuel economy. So you can see this really clearly right here. That's right off the bat. Now, let's all look at our 3 oils we tested and how they compared to each other. So as we look at these results, the first thing we want to see before we look at the power numbers is make sure we have the same water temperature and oil temperature, because that can easily throw off your results and create a misleading representation of the results. You want to make sure your water temperature and oil temperature are consistent when you're comparing power numbers. That way you're looking at apples to apples instead of apples to pineapples. And we can see that our coolant temperature right in line, very close between all 3 runs. And these are averages, by the way, not just one run. These are averages of a few runs toward the end of the test. So everything's run in and we have, it's going to be what it's going to be at this point. We're almost 2 hours into the test. We're taking end of test results of what is it really doing at the end. And we can see there's a little bit of scatter in the oil temperature, much closer with the water temperature. I'm not worried about it. And really what you see, the oil that is the mineral base, the Havoline, is the one that has the highest temperature. And then the 2 synthetics are slightly lower. And that jives with what we've seen historically doing oil testing, is that mineral oils have a lower specific heat value. Therefore, they tend to run hotter under the same conditions. They just can't move the heat as well. Synthetics move the heat better, therefore they run cooler, which is why we use synthetics in the race cars, is because they cool better, not just make more horsepower. So the oil that actually made the most horsepower was the Valvoline VR1, and it also was running the coolest. And that's not a coincidence. Anytime you're reducing friction, you're going to be reducing operating temperature. And again, we've seen this time and time again, especially with this engine. When you reduce friction, not only will it show more power, it will also show less temperature, because friction is temperature. Great correlation here again. What oil had the least amount of power? It was the conventional. These numbers are super, super close. I mean, they're all, again, you can that looks like they printed it over each other, which is what happened, right? There's not a big variation between the three oils. But we do know that this engine dyno is incredibly consistent. So we can say that the Havoline was slightly lower in power than the SuperTech. And then the VR1 was slightly more than the SuperTech. But it's pretty clear. The SuperTech beat the Havoline. Not only do we see lower friction, i.e. more horsepower and lower temperatures with the two synthetic oils, the Valvoline VR1 and the SuperTech, when we go look at the wear results, guess what? We're going to see the exact same thing repeat itself. So speaking of those used oil analysis results, instead of sending them off to speed diagnostics like we normally would, we actually sent these samples back to the guys at High Performance Lubricants because they have a test that's usually used for new oils called a PDSC, Pressure Differential Scanning Kilometer. So it's very similar in terms of determining oil life to the RPVOT, which was that rotating pressure vessel oxidation test we used in a previous video, where you can kind of say, hey, look, there's a way you can look at how long is that oil going to live. I wanted to do after this test, after running this engine for 2 hours at up to 280, 290 degrees oil temperature, how much degradation in oil life was there just at that little bit of time at a higher temperature. So to know that result, we needed to have that kind of test. And because the guys at HPL have that device and can run that test with a pretty small amount of oil, we were able to run from the fresh out of the bottle, the 0 hour, the 1 hour, and the 2 hour test. We can get that PDSC value for all three oils, and that's going to tell us how much that oil life changed just in that short 2 hours of running. So let's go ahead and dive into these results. I kind of hinted at a second ago that there was a difference in wear that correlates pretty closely to the difference in power level. So there's that friction and wear, in this case, did kind of correlate. I know in the previous video we said it's not always the case, and it's not always the case. But when you're doing the job right, you're going to reduce friction and wear at the same time. But the only way you know that you're reducing friction and wear at the same time is measuring. So let's go take a look at these measurements. The first thing we see right here with the Havoline is on the 0 hour sample and the virgin oil sample straight from the bottle are identical, which is what you want. That means we did a good job flushing the engine out so that that 0 hour sample pretty much matches exactly what we saw with the fresh out of the bottle sample. Again, good job on that. Now we want to look at that 1 hour and then the 2 hour. And we can see that as the engine ran, as time went on, there was an increase in wear. Now what's super interesting here is that the wear here total is much less than we've seen before, even with similar oils. And at first I was like, wait, did they miscalibrate the ICP? Hey, run this up again. But the reality was, then I remembered, hey, dummy, we were testing these new rings with the new honing process that goes along with this new advanced variable hardness coating. And then I had to go back and take a look at the results of the coating testing we did at Southwest Research and compare it to oils just like this. Then I saw the difference. When we look back at the test specimens from the ring on liner testing we did with Southwest Research and saw those specimens, that's where the light bulb turned on for me. What you can see right here is the wear scar with the regular coating and the regular honing method. There's a pretty big difference when you compare that to this. There was so much less wear with the variable hardness coating when we did the ring on liner test. Then I finally remembered, oh, this is why the wear is lower than we've seen in the past with the same engine setup. The reason why is the piston ring rubbing against the cylinder wall is the #1 source of wear in the engine. So by changing the coating and changing the way we hone the engine, we greatly reduced how much wear occurred in the engine, which is why we skewed these numbers so much less. So when you see a few more of these numbers in a minute, some people are going to say, wait, those numbers are way too small. You can't even read that. Yes, we can read that because we're controlling it based on that 0 hour sample and the flushing, right? So because we ran the flush, because we have the 0 hour sample, we can compare that delta. That delta is real, and we can verify that by correlating it back to what we saw in the lab with the ring on liner testing. This new coating greatly reduced wear, it reduced friction, so we're okay with these numbers being smaller because we know why they're smaller now. With that being said, let's jump back to the numbers. So looking at those Havoline numbers, the total parts per million of all the wear in that sample was only 11 parts per million at the end of the test. We look down at the numbers, the silicon increased a little bit because that's an engine running in a dyno without an air cleaner. And you'll see over all three samples that silicon increase is pretty consistent. I'm not worried about that. Additive packages, really no big change, no consumptions, only ran for 2 hours. It didn't run long enough for anything to really happen. That PDSC number, that oxidation stability, out of the bottle, 0 hour sample is right at 45 minutes. And then after running it for an hour, it lost about 3 to 4 minutes, but then it lost another minute after the second hour of testing. So we went from basically 45 minutes down to 40 minutes. So we had about a 10% decrease in the life of the oil just on 2 hours of that high temperature running with the conventional oil. Now let's go take a look at the Walmart SuperTech synthetic. And when we look at the SuperTech, we see the wear metals dropped. So going from that name brand conventional oil to the discount brand synthetic, again, the chemistry, the engine, it didn't read the label, it didn't care what brand it was, it just said, oh, we like this better. It made more power and it had less wear. So total wear metals now are only 8 parts per million. Not a huge shift from 11 to 8, but still a shift in the right direction. Kind of the power gain wasn't huge, but it was still directionally correct. So slight gains for the discount brand synthetic over the name brand conventional in both cases here. Roll down again, not a big change in silicon here, a little bit less than before, so that's a good thing, I guess. Come down and look and say, okay, here's what else we got going on, because one thing I didn't mention is there is some silicon in the ring as well. That coating has some silicon in it, so we can't just say that silicon is only dirt. The silicon is also embedded in the ring, so while the titanium levels are very low, some of that silicon increase could be coming from the ring wearing, and so that less silicon in this sample could also be an indication that there's just less wear going on overall, which kind of correlates with the rest of the results. But here's the best part. Let's go look at that PDSC value as well, because right out of the bottle, 71. So we go from 45 minutes to 71 minutes, just going from a API SP conventional 10W30 to a synthetic API SP 10W30. Everything about these oils are the same in terms of specs. But going from conventional to synthetic, we greatly increased the oxidation life of the oil. Now we did see about, again, a 10% change in oil life from out of the bottle of that 0 hour sample to after 2 hours. There was a change. It lost some of that life during that change, but the percentage is about the same. But because you started at a higher spot, it means the oil is going to live longer. Back to what we saw in the video when we did at Valvoline, and Roger was talking about that temperature 1, temperature 2, and how synthetics raise that temperature 1. In this case, we see that. We ran these two oils at the same temperature, but the synthetic has a greater resistance to break down than that. Now, they both had about a 10% loss. You started from a higher spot. It gave you more margin to begin with. So again, this is really great stuff to kind of unpack. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm so excited about this because there's so many little nuggets of information in all this test data. You know, just running a couple of 3 oils on the dyno in a couple of days. There's so much information you can gain by digging into these details. And again, we got more to come, so we're not done yet. So in case you missed it, a myth about flat tappet camshafts just got busted. That Walmart SuperTech, a synthetic oil, just did better in wear protection than a conventional oil with a flat tappet camshaft. So these results prove you can use a synthetic oil with a flat tappet camshaft. Myth busted. So we know the SuperTech has pretty much beat the Havoline. Now let's go see what that VR1 race oil did in comparison to those two. And when we hop over to the Valvoline VR1, yes, it definitely met its name. You know, a high air zinc race oil designed for this kind of engine, and now our total wear metals are down to 3. So we went from 11 all the way to 3 just by changing the chemistry of the oil. Of course, this is not an API rated oil, and it did make a little more horsepower than the other ones. So it was definitely the winner in this one for this type of engine, that flat tappet, old school type engine, making 450 horsepower. This oil's more suited to that application, therefore it did better. Right, I'm not saying you should go put VR1 in your daily driver unless your daily driver has a 450 horsepower small block Chevy in it. Well, then it's the right oil for your application. Right? Application always dictates chemistry. All right, everything else is about the same as before. We know that there's a little bit different friction modifier package in this oil compared to the others because it's not API rated, and you can see that higher level of zinc and phosphorus there that goes along with that non-API rating for this product. But let's go over here and see about that PDSC result. I told you there were some nuggets here. Okay, should you ever run a racing oil in your street car? No. And here's why. The VR1 here is designed for classic cars and some racing cars where they're going to change the oil more often. So you can use this oil as directed and it's going to be just fine. But they're telling you to run shorter drain intervals. They're not telling you to run 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 mile drain intervals, even though it's synthetic. Why? Here's the key thing. Right out of the bottle, we're at 62 minutes. So not as high as the SuperTech. Why? Probably because as a racing oil, it doesn't need as much what they call antioxidant, the higher temperature stabilizing additives, because it's just not going to be in the vehicle as long. Racing oils aren't designed to be 10,000 mile oils. A great analogy to think about a race oil versus a passenger car oil. Think about tires. Racing tires, not only are they slick sometimes, they're also a softer compound of rubber. It means they get more grip, but they don't live as long. Whereas your all-season radial tires are going to be not only grooved differently, they're also going to be a harder compound rubber, so they last longer. They don't have as much grip, but they will last longer. And that's really the key thing here is as you add antioxidants to the oil to extend that life, it's kind of like making that tire rubber harder so it lives longer. So there's a trade-off here, so just know that when we're seeing this. Hang on, because this is going to get really freaking good. Right out of the bottle, it's 62. After it's doing the flush, that little bit of runtime and flushing, it dropped from 62 to 56. Whoa, what's going on here? And you run it for an hour and it drops to 46, and then it basically stabilizes. We go from 62 to 47 in 2 hours. Big change. Why? It's because some of those friction modifiers that help it make more power aren't as thermally stable. We saw this back in the Joe Gibbs racing days. There were things that you could put in the oil that would never make it in a passenger car. It could never go 10,000 miles. But it could give you horsepower right now. And it could last for a few hours just fine. But it wasn't oxidatively stable enough to live long term. And that's exactly what you see here. The guys at Valvoline have brought in chemistry that they've perfected and known from doing racing engines and said, this additive is going to give you horsepower. It can give you wear protection. Not going to last very long. It's like the racing tires. It's not going to last as long, but it's going to give you more performance right here, right now, when you need it. And that's exactly what we see here. And I can tell you that's a fact because let's go look at the FTIR results, and I'm going to show you exactly where I can see that little friction modifier change. What you're seeing here are all 4 samples, the FTIR trace, overlaid on each other. Now, it looks like they're all there, but there's one little spot right here. Let's zoom in on that one little spot right there. You can see the change over time, that it's decreased. That little change is what's showing up as that bigger change in the PDSC. It's like that one frayed string from the knitted garment where you can then pull it all apart. This is that one spot where it's began to kind of break and then pull apart. Back to race oils are designed for a race environment. They're not designed for the street car environment. And you can see this chemically right here. That one little piece of chemical that begins to unravel begins to create free radicals and other bad things happen. It's a snowball effect. And before too long, you've got your oil completely broken down. You could have sludge problems, you have varnish problems, all kinds of bad things could happen because this is where that one little thing came apart. Now let's go see what happens when you look at the Havoline. There's not a big change. There's a little shift in this area. You can see that the different colors are starting to line up, but basically from new, which is the pink, there's not a big change here. Now let's go look at the SuperTech. There's really no big change here with the SuperTech. There's nowhere where there's a chink in the armor. There's no place where that chemistry is starting to come apart. After the 2 hours of high temperature running, SuperTech's pretty much unfazed. So I hope you guys have enjoyed geeking out on this as much as I have. I mean, what cool data. Just comparing a conventional name brand oil to a discount brand synthetic and then contrasting that to the full race synthetic oil. I mean, wow, my mind's still blown. I'm so excited about this. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed doing it. If you like this kind of stuff, you need to hit that subscribe button because there's more oil geek out coming from the Motor Oil Geek, so stay tuned.